He said, amen.
Oh.
It was just chilling.
Everybody was crying.
It was.
Yeah. John calls them signs instead of miracles. And so we're going to be looking at the signs in the order that John put them. John didn't write this book in chronological order like Mark and Luke did. In fact, he wrote after them, so he may have pulled some information from them to put in his book. But John was an eyewitness to most of these things, where Mark and Luke were not eyewitnesses. Here's the lineup. We've already did on March the 9th, the introduction, and last week we did the first sign. Today we're doing the second sign. Next week we'll do the third, then the fourth. And then they have a lesson on Jesus and Nicodemus. So you see we go from chapter 1 to 2 to 4 to 5 and then to 6. They kind of passed over 3 because they wanted to do it just before Easter about Nicodemus. But and then we have Easter, and we have no life groups on Easter, on the 20th. But what's going to happen, I put that in red about Jesus and Nicodemus, because I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move it down after Easter and tie it in with some of these that just have a few verses. Some of them, if you look at April the 27th, we have 16 through 21, we have 6 verses. Well, that's not going to take 45 minutes, so I can do Nicodemus and combine those together. But what's in red there is the Sunday before Easter, and I always do an Easter presentation here. So you'll see how that changed. Then we'll go all the way down through the 7th sign, or the 7th miracle that John speaks about. As we continue reading in the book of John, we need to remember that John was not writing these events in true chronological order. Similar. John's main purpose in writing this book was to show the miracles of Jesus, which he called signs, to prove without a doubt that Jesus was the Son of God. He was more concerned with the meaning of the miracle than the actual miracle of itself. And that's why he wrote this. Mark and Luke wrote their Gospels as chronological order of events in the life of Jesus as best they could. I want you to see the first 4 verses in Luke's Gospel so you understand. Luke said this, many have undertaken to draw up an account of things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. In other words, he said they're handed down to us because Luke was not one of the disciples. But he says people have tried to make it an account, and he says, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you. And then he says, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. Matthew wrote his gospel mainly to the Jews to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies. So they have different reasons. And when Luke says, he addresses this to, what did he call it?
Most excellent.
Excellent. Most excellent, meaning that he was probably a Roman centurion or something. And so he was probably writing to help update so that they understood things correctly. Matthew wrote his because he just, to the Jews, not the Gentiles, I want to prove to you, Matthew has more scriptures that says, as it says in the Old, this. And he's going back to the Old and saying, see, Jesus fulfilled this. He's trying to convince Jews. So his writings were different. Last Sunday we read about Jesus changing the water into wine at the wedding celebration in Canaan. This was his first miracle. Just where was Canaan? First of all, what I want you to see is during the time of Jesus, Israel was divided into 3 regions in the time of Jesus. So you see that they have Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. What region was Mary and Joseph from? Of those 3, Mary and Joseph were from where?
Galilee.
What town were they from?
Nazareth,
Nazareth. Where's Nazareth?
Galilee.
Galilee. Okay. So it's Galilee. What region was Jesus born in?
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem's the town. Where's Bethlehem?
Is that Benjamin?
South of Jerusalem, so it's in Judea.
Judea.
Remember, he had to travel because of taxation? What region was Jesus raised in his childhood? What town? Back to Nazareth. So he was in Galilee. Yeah. What region did Jesus perform his first miracle in?
Galilee.
Yeah, who said that? Good for you. Yeah, Galilee. Yeah, because it was at Cana, and Cana is in Galilee. So I think we need to take a closer look at that. Jesus was raised in Nazareth. That's in Galilee. Jesus began his ministry by being baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. Jesus called Peter, Andrew, John, and James to follow him from the sea, at the edge of the Sea of Galilee. So you see, everything's taking place in Judea. Jesus performed his first miracle at Cana. Let's follow the steps of Jesus as he leaves Cana along with his disciples. So how many disciples has he got right now? If you don't know, count them.
4.
Okay, 4. Good job. After this, and the after this is after working the miracle of changing the water and wine at Cana. He went down to Capernaum. On the map, Capernaum's up. Why do they say he went down?
Mountains.
Huh?
Mountains.
Yeah, mountainous, and it goes down towards the Galilee. That's why the sea's down there. All the stuff that goes down here goes down to the Sea of Galilee. So he went to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they stayed for a few days. So that's where he went right after he worked the miracles. Let's check our map on that and see. Jesus and his mother and his 4 disciples, along with a few relatives, they left Cana and they went to Capernaum, which was about 16 miles. Most of the ministry of Jesus was spent in Galilee, and Capernaum became his home base. That's where he's based off. He'd go to Jerusalem, he'd come back there. He'd go out somewhere else, he'd come back to Capernaum. That was kind of his home base. Next, we're going to read about Jesus running the money changers out of the temple in Jerusalem. This is not a miracle, but it's an important event in the life of Jesus. So this takes place in between the miracle at Cana and the next one that we're about to read about. So I did not want to skip over this, and we had plenty of time to work it in, and I think it's important. John records this event early in the ministry of Jesus. We read where Mark and Luke both wrote about a similar event, but it was in the last week of Jesus. Do we have a controversy? Not really. But this was in John's writing early in the ministry. He left Capernaum. He went to Jerusalem because he goes down for the Passover. And he ran the money changers out. And then Mark and Luke both recorded in that last week. Got some reasons to show you. Some believe that John focused on individual events in the life of Jesus without regarding to timing or chronological order. This belief would lead one to believe that they were the same events. However, most Bible scholars have no problem believing that they were 2 separate events. It says, now while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs that he was performing and believed in his name. Did Jesus in the last week, when he came in on Palm Sunday in that last week, did he work any miracles? He did not. So it looks like it's going to be 2 different events, and John's the only one that records the early event because he's still in the early ministry of Jesus. During the last week in Jerusalem, there is no recordings of Jesus performing miracles. John continues, he said, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went, oh, I've left my Bible at home. Anybody got a Life Application Bible? Okay, I meant to do it because I didn't want to retype some of the footnotes of the Life Application Bible, so I was going to read it and then I forgot to bring my Bible on. Okay, but it was the footnotes. The Passover celebration took place early in at the temple in Jerusalem. Yearly. Every male was expected to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem during this time. It didn't say anything about the females or the children, but the males were supposed to go once a year to Jerusalem for the Passover celebration. There was a week-long festival. Passover was one day, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread lasted the rest of the week. Now, the wording on that is worded that way for a particular reason the rest of the week. The Jews today are split on what they believe. Half the Jews believe Passover and then 6 days, and that finished the week. And others believe, no, it's Passover and a week, 7. So some believe it's 7 days long totally, and some believe it's 8 days long. So if you're reading somewhere, you might sometimes say, well, I read where it was 8 days. And then somebody says, well, I read where it was 7 days. That's why. Because they didn't know how to work that in. So they didn't settle on anything. The entire week commemorated the freeing of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Now, I found that statement somewhere in the scriptures, and it said the entire week commemorated the freeing of the Jews from slavery in Egypt. And why did I not like Jews being in there? They never got the name Jews till hundreds of years later. They were called Israelites. So you might remember when they got called Jews? Remember the southern kingdom got overrun by the Babylonians, and they took them back over in an area which is Iraq today, and they called them Jews over there. Why did they call them Jews?
Judea.
Yeah.
Huh?
Judea.
Yeah, they were from Judah.
Judea.
You're from Texas, you're a Texan, you know. You're Oklahoma, you're an Okie. Yeah. They were from Judea, they were Jews. So anyway, slavery, they weren't called Jews, so I had to change that. They were Israelites. But the Passover was to celebrate and do that. The reason you do a Passover celebration, it was God's way of saying, okay, they weren't writing books and things right then. How do you pass it on to your children? Well, you have this celebration every year. And they say, why are we doing all this? And you teach your children over and over and over all that. Every year you get to teach children. In the temple courts, Jesus found people selling cattle, sheep, doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords, and he drove all from the temple courts, both the sheep and the cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers, and he overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. His disciples remembered that it is written, and it was written, I think, in Proverbs, zeal for your house will consume me. And in the King James it said, what? The zeal for thine house hath eaten me up, or given me righteous anger. So was Jesus angry? Yes, he was. We called it righteous anger of what he saw. You remember when they built the tabernacle, you had the outer court, and you go inside there, and that's where they had the altar and for sacrifices and things. And then you had another one, it's called the holy place, and then it was divided on the inside, and there was the Holy of Holies. Well, by this time, they had made another outer ring. In this outer court now, it was called the court of the Gentiles, or the court of the women. So the women, that's the only place they could go into the temple, was into the first courtyard, and that's the only place Gentiles could go. The next one, only the the Jewish men could go into from that place. So it's in this outer court of the Gentiles, or the women. This is where all the tables and things had been set up, and all this was going on. So I said I was going to read from the Application Bible, so I'll just have to tell you about it. Now, we go back, and if you look at those pictures, we go back to the time of the Passover. Why did they even call it Passover? Well, God said, I'm going to destroy the first of every living thing in Egypt. except those that did what?
Blood over.
Put the blood over the top of the door and down. And a lot of people talk about the cross, the blood across and down. And so anybody that did that showed that they believed God's word. And they passed over and none were killed. Passover. And then they celebrate it with a meal. And it goes into tons of detail about what you eat and herbs and all kinds of stuff. And there, it's really complicated. But remember, that meal is not really celebrated by anybody except the Jews now, because Jesus came and he changed the Passover meal to what? The Lord's Supper. And all he did is he broke the bread. He said, this is my body that will be broken for you. This is the cup. This is the blood of my body. So he changed. We don't celebrate the Passover meal. We celebrate his Last Supper. He changed that on the Thursday night before he went to the cross on Friday. And then you see that picture of that Passover meal. So let's talk about the what was going on in that temple, in that outer court, the court of the women of the Gentiles out there. People would travel a long ways to come for the Passover. Well, they would make sacrifices. Well, some of them, if you tried to bring an animal that far, you'd probably die before you get there. So you brought your money and you bought them. So they sold animals, and then they also traded. But here's what happened to those that brought animals in. They would have Jewish people in the temples, and they would go and inspect your animal and say, well, no, your animal's not clean. You can't use it for a sacrifice. But I have one I can sell you. You see what's going on? You see how bad it was? The money changers, some people would come in. They would be out in another country and come in. They're Jews. And they had different currency, though they had to swap it off for the regular currency. Boy, don't you know that was an even trade? Huh? The money changers, yeah. That's what you get, the money exchangers. And Jesus was mad. He turned over the table of all these things that were going on. Now the same thing went on, it looks like probably every Passover. They were right back in doing it, because on the last week of Jesus, he came in, and remember, he ran them out again and tore them up. So that's what was going on at that time. What was it that made Jesus so angry? What would Jesus think if he visited Lake Point today? Afraid to talk? Say something.
Not any animals.
No, you don't have any animals. We don't have a money changer.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm not pushing. I don't have an answer. I'm just saying. He went to the Passover and he walked in and he became angry. That was not the place of worship. Would he be pleased? Probably, mostly, maybe. I think once Josh started preaching, he'd be extremely pleased with the word being preached as it comes out of the Bible, the Word of God, not just some flippant stuff out here. Very good.
I don't think it matters what you wear. If you're going
It doesn't, but did it matter that in the courtyard that they were being dishonest out there? They were cheating the people and saying, you know, your animal's no good, David. It's got a spot or a blemish, so you can't use it, so I'll sell you this one at an exorbitant, real high price. Yeah. Just a thought, but Jesus was not happy that this is a place of worship.
But Steve Stroop changed the dress code.
Huh?
Steve Stroop changed the dress code. Here.
Yeah, he preached about it one time, you know. Next, we're going to read about what John saw. It was called the second sign. Now, what we just covered was not supposed to be part of today's lesson, but it was an event that took place between these two miracles, and so I wanted to work them in. We'll be skipping over chapter 3, and we'll come back to it later, because that's the story of Nicodemus. That's a great one. I use that story sometimes in funerals when I do. Not every time, but sometimes. We'll be skipping over chapter 3. We'll come back to it in a couple of weeks to read about Jesus and Nicodemus. While there's not a miracle in the story, the message is very powerful about Nicodemus. No miracle is not counted as one of the signs, but it's something we don't want to skip. sign number 2, Jesus had returned from the Jerusalem after Passover. So I wanted you to see. You see, he went all the way to Jerusalem for Passover and he came back. Now, when the people were coming down from Galilee and they were going to go to Judea, where Jerusalem is, what did they have to pass through? What region? Samaria. You know what they did? The Jews.
They go around.
They went across the Jordan River, came down the other side, and they come back into Judea because they wouldn't walk through. But you remember the woman at the well with Jesus? He made his disciples walk straight through there, didn't they? They didn't like it. Then he even told them, go into town and get us some food. And that's where he met the woman at the well. But he kind of put them through it, didn't he? God puts us through stuff sometimes too for a reason. You know, I love that story, the woman at the well. Anyway, I wanted you to see he's gone back down here, and now he's come back to Galilee in the north. Once more, he visited Cana. So he went down and he came back to Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. See, I showed you the map so you would have this. How far apart are those two? 16 miles. Oh, my goodness, good. When this man heard that Jesus, this man being the royal official, heard that Jesus had arrived from Galilee, from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son who was close to death. So once again, Jesus was at Cana. The royal official traveled from Capernaum to Cana, about 16 miles. The royal official was most likely an officer in King Herod's army. There's 2 King Herods. Do you remember when Jesus went before Pilate and he found out, oh, you're from Galilee? Well, that's King Herod's area. And King Herod happened to be down in Jerusalem visiting. He sent him to King Herod. They roughed him up real bad and sent him back to Pilate. Well, that's one King Herod. His grandfather is King Herod the Great. He's over all of it. King Herod was only over Galilee, the governor of Galilee. Okay, so this was probably an official in King Herod's army in Galilee. He had walked 16 miles to see Jesus and addressed him as sir. Now, he could have been riding a horse or on a chariot, but if you walk, it's a pretty good walk, 16 miles. But he went there to see Jesus, and he addressed him as sir. It's funny, he didn't call him Lord. Not quite there yet. He knows that Jesus is a man of miracles, but he probably hasn't reached the point that he understands that he's the Son of God. He said, sir, which would be putting himself lower than Jesus, even though his legal authority was higher than Jesus. Does that make sense? He kind of lowered himself to do this. But his son's dying. He's desperate. Obviously, the royal official had seen Jesus or heard of his miracle at Cana. In fact, he even knew when Jesus had gone to Jerusalem and must have been anxiously waiting for his return. My son's dying, but Jesus is not here. He's down there in Jerusalem. Aha, he's back. He's back at Cana. So he's anxious to get to him. The official traveled to Cana and he begged Jesus to come to Capernaum and heal his son. We continue reading. He says, Jesus said these words. He said, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told them, you will never believe. You people, that's the same as saying y'all in Texas. Okay. Unless y'all see signs and wonders. So he's kind of addressing the whole group. He's not really addressing that man. That man does believe that Jesus can do these things. He may not believe that he's the Son of God, but he believes he can do the miracles with it. Unless you see signs and wonders, Jesus told them, you will never believe. Jesus seemed to have a harsh response to the official's request, yet he addressed the whole crowd. Why was that crowd following him in the first place?
To see his miracle.
Miracles.
Yeah, miracle in Cana. Jesus knew that most of the crowd had no idea who he was. They just followed him because of his miracle in Cana. The royal official said, sir, come down before my child dies. He's begging. Some believe that the official may have had limited faith in what Jesus could do because he begged him to come to Capernaum to heal his son. He didn't say, just say the word and my son will be healed. He said, come and come back. Because he evidently believed Jesus had to be present to heal him. Did he believe that Jesus had to be present to heal his son? Obviously so. Jesus said, go thy way. He replied, thy son liveth. The man took Jesus at his word, and he went his way. Now I'm going to put this in the NIV. That's the King James I did up there. The man took Jesus at his word, and he departed. Neither one of those say he went home. You'll see why I say that now. The official showed great faith in Jesus by immediately doing what Jesus said, and he went on his way. While he was still on his way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday, at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Then the father realized that was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole house believed. That was the second sign Jesus performed after coming to Judah of Galilee. It's only 16 miles. He met the men on the way. And it was yesterday that Jesus told him your son was healed. What does that say? What do you gather from? He didn't go directly home. Jesus said, your son's healed. He must have just believed him and went about his business in Canaan and started on the next day. Is that what you get out of that? Is that what it looks like? I'm going to show you. He showed great faith. If that's the way it is, he said. That was the exact time at which Jesus said yesterday. Amazing. That makes sense? Interesting. An interesting observation from Charles Swindoll, also called Chuck Swindoll. I did take time to write this. These are his words, not mine, and I didn't want to take credit for him. He said, a natural response would have been for the official to rush home to verify that the boy was indeed better. That would be a little bit of lack of faith. Not sure. But a close examination of the details tell a different story. The official didn't rush off at all. He went about his business in Cana. We know this by putting several clues together. Capernaum was no more than 6 hours away on foot, 2 hours by horse or chariot. As the official journeyed home, his servants met him with the news that his son had recovered. Note the time of the healing, the 7th hour or 1 p.m. yesterday. The official didn't start home until the day after his encounter with Jesus. Jesus told him, go thy way. Jesus replied, your son liveth. Did he say go home? No, he said go your way. True faith. Did he believe he didn't have to turn around and go home right then to check on the boy to see if he was living or not? He believed and went home the next day. I never knew that part of the story, did you? Until I started putting this together on that. I thought that was pretty interesting. Put your faith in him. Have a blessed week. Was that interesting? You learned something? I learned a whole bunch on some of that stuff. Now, 5 minutes. I wanted to show y'all when we did the lesson on heaven about this little 4-year-old girl that started drawing and painting, Akiana. I have about 4 videos, but I would like to at least maybe show you just a little 3 or 4 minute one. It's the only one that you can kind of believe in.
No visual on the screen.
Let's see if it comes back up when I hit this.
Just a little touch.
There it is.
Yeah, don't touch anything.
You're still testing.
I said we tried to do this last time. We said we attempted to show you videos of a little girl that God allowed to see visions in heaven. for whatever reason, the TV would not play, the sound, the laptop locked up. I tried everything, nothing worked. Yet when I switched to the presentation to the book of John, that last week, everything worked. Strange. I don't know what's going on. What I know is, what I don't know is, did God cause this? Did Satan cause this? Was it just by chance? I don't know. God knows. Today I want to try this again and jump back to the study of John. We said only 2 people in the Bible saw heaven return to earth to write about it. Who are they?
Paul
Andrew was one of
and
them.
John.
Paul and John.
Paul John.
Disciples, John and Paul. The Apostle Paul, not a disciple. You may have heard about people exclaiming to have had near-death experiences before, and they tell you they saw heaven. You don't know if they're true or not. We don't have any way to prove or disprove their experiences. However, I personally believe in a young girl that actually visited heaven and saw visions in heaven because she's got proof of it. I would like to share her stories with you. There's several videos. It started when she was 4 years old when she experienced her first vision. Her name is Akiana Kramaric. She was born on July 9, 1994 in Mount Morris, Illinois, is an American poet and painter. She began drawing at the age of 4 and painting at the age of 6. Self-taught, or she says, taught by God. Her parents were surprised when she just started describing dreams and visions from God at a very young age, despite being raised in an atheist household. Her early life was simple. No television, no radio. She was homeschooled. Her artistic talent and spiritual experiences led her to create detailed and realistic paintings, often inspired by her visions of heaven and religious experiences. By the age of 12, she had completed 60 large paintings and gained significant recognition for her work. Just going to show you one of them.
So, let me introduce you. According to art critics around the world, my guest this morning is one of a few prodigies in decades to capture the art of realism. Akiana Kramaric is 10 years old and has already sold numerous paintings for over $40,000 each.
Wow.
She is internationally renowned for her Prince of Peace and Father Forgive Them pieces. Akiana began painting at the age of 4 and sold her first painting at 7 for $10,000. She speaks 4 languages, and she aspires to use her God-given talents to raise money for the African AIDS crisis. Please welcome with me Miss Akiana Kramaric. Akiana, God loves you, and so do we.
By the way, she's 29 years old now.
Raise money for the African AIDS crisis.
Well, when I was 4 years old, I had a vision of helping the whole world. And that is just one of my things that I'm going to do. I'm going to help, I'll try to help the whole world, poor children around the world, homeless children, and things like that.
Well, that's quite a vision for a 4-year-old. That's not the vision most 4-year-olds have.
Yes.
Most
I
4-year-olds.
myself didn't understand at first, but I began to understand when I got a little older.
Wow. Well, you've had lots of visions as a young
Lots of
child,
visions,
haven't you?
yes.
What are some of your other visions?
Well, visions of paintings, the Prince of Peace and the Father Forgive Them, and many, many others. I probably have, including my oil pastels, probably over 60 paintings, color paintings, and all those are visions. Even poetry I write, and I started writing at the age of 7. All those are visions, and I myself, I forget them. The way I can remember them is to write them or to paint them.
So when you say a vision, is a vision like a thought in your head, or is it something you see when you close your eyes? What does a vision look like to you?
Well, vision looks like a dream, like a dreaming of somewhere you want to be, or dream someone you want to meet. So to me, that's a vision. I think one of my visions is to help the whole world.
That is a beautiful, beautiful vision, and I have no doubt you're gonna do that, and do that very well. So, how did you discover you had a talent of painting?
Well, when I was 4, when I was sleeping one day, I had a vision that I was like a professional artist. And I was like, I don't know, I just saw myself a little older, like at 7 years old.
Oh, really old, yeah. I'm looking at a couple pieces which are absolutely spectacular.
Thank you.
What are those? Tell me about it.
Look, I'm gonna stop it because we're over time, but now that I got your attention, and we'll come back and we'll start showing the rest of this interview. I got 3 other interviews with her. This picture right here, I'll just tell you in advance, she'd been looking, she said, for a year for a model for Jesus, and she couldn't find one. And at the age of 8, there was a knock at the door, and this guy was standing there, and she said, "Oh, that's him!" She said, 4 foot tall, and he agreed, and he was a carpenter. And she painted this called the Prince of Peace, and there's a lot of story behind it, but I'll end it right here because we're past time.